The sky hasn't been a real sky in a long time. Not the kind you'd look up at and feel something close to peace. Now it hangs low and heavy, a bruised sheet of ash smeared with streaks of orange and toxic yellow. Some days it glows as if lit from behind by fire. Other days it's so thick with dust that even the sun looks bruised, a dim red disk barely pushing through the murk. But blue? No. Blue died long before the rest of the world did. The heat never stops anymore. It presses against the skin like a punishment, crawling into your lungs every time you take a breath. The air tastes metallic, like you're breathing in the rust of the old world. The storms burned out years ago, replaced by a constant, suffocating dryness. Even the wind is hot. It blows through the empty streets carrying grit sharp enough to cut the face if you're not covered. And the nights don't cool off the way they used to. They hold onto the heat like the earth refuses to let go of its last fever. I walk past the bones of the city almost every day, though I avoid looking too long. It still feels wrong, seeing it like this, hollowed out, stripped of everything that made it human. The towers that once mirrored the sky now lean like dying trees, their glass shattered long ago by storms that hit with the fury of a planet pushed past its breaking point. Roads split open from drought, buckling like the earth is trying to swallow what's left. Cars rust where they were abandoned, half buried in dust that blows in from the dead farmlands. The billboards, the shops, the signs, everything is faded and sun-bleached, as if all color has been drained from the world. Landmarks I once used to navigate by are barely recognizable now. That bridge over the river, gone. The river dried up to a cracked graveyard of stone. The old stadium, burned out during the wildfire years, those endless seasons where flames crawled across the horizon like hungry beasts, devouring everything living and dead. And the suburbs, those neat rows of homes. Most were claimed by the heat first, their foundations cracking apart. The rest were stripped clean by scavengers or destroyed by desperate people trying to build something, anything, to shield themselves from the new world. What's left of civilization is scattered, fragmented like the broken concrete beneath my feet. Governments collapsed one by one when the food chains did. When the crops failed, the systems failed. When the oceans rose and swallowed the coasts, the refugees multiplied. When the heat waves started killing thousands in days, panic replaced leadership. No country could hold itself together. No institution could survive the sheer speed of the unraveling. There are still groups out here, pockets of survivors. Some form small communities, tight-knit groups clinging to routines, rationing what little they salvage. Others roam in bands, scavengers with dead eyes who'd kill for a half-broken canteen. And then there are the factions, half militia, half cult, who believe the world ended so something new could rise from the ashes. They don't agree on what that something should be, but they agree on violence as the way to get it. Trust is rare. Hope is rarer. Communication systems collapsed with the final blackouts. Radio is one of the few things that still works, if you can power it. If you can keep the circuits dry. If you can find a clear frequency that isn't swallowed by static storms. Sometimes you hear voices, faint and trembling, reaching out across the dead silence. Sometimes you hear screams. Sometimes just the endless roar of dust storms rolling through abandoned towns like ghosts looking for something to haunt. Water is more valuable than blood. People kill for it. People die for it. Wells dried up. Reservoirs cracked open. The ground turned to powder beneath your boots, and the only thing left to drink is what you can purify from abandoned filtration systems, systems that are failing more every day. Food is scavenged from canned goods long past their expiration dates. The lucky ones find old hydroponic setups still clinging to life. The unlucky ones, well, most people are unlucky now. Even the animals are disappearing. The birds left first, abandoning us to a silent sky. The insects followed, leaving crops to wither. The wild predators starved or burned or turned so desperate that encountering one became a kind of death sentence. I move through this place like a ghost most days, careful, quiet, always listening. The land feels alive in the wrong ways, like it's groaning under the weight of everything we did to it, like it remembers, like it's not finished collapsing yet. There's a tension in the air you can feel but not explain, a nervous hum beneath the silence, as if the world is holding its breath, waiting for the next disaster to break it even further. This is the world now, a world stripped bare, a world haunted by what it used to be, a world where survival isn't guaranteed, not even for the strongest, the smartest, or the lucky. A world where hope flickers like a dying ember, and every new sunrise feels like borrowed time. My name is Miles Harrington. Once that name fit neatly on a payroll stub, a driver's license, a coffee-stained office mug. Now it fits on a scrap of cardboard tucked behind the knobs of my transmitter, written in a shaky hand so I can find it in the dark. Names matter less out here, voices matter more. I learned that the night I found a child's voice on 7.82 megahertz, small, terrified, asking for water, and I answered. I was a radio host in the life before. Dead air and coffee, song requests, and the steady hum of an audience that tuned in because they knew I'd be there. I never thought that skill would translate into survival, but it did. In a world that has forgotten how to be quiet, I make noise on purpose. I patch signals together like sewing old wounds, battery to inverter, antenna to mast, generator to circuit. The broadcast is my anchor. The speakers are my company. The logbook is my confession. Survival is ordinary now. It is not heroics or grand gestures. It is replacing a cracked valve on a rain collector at dawn, looting a pharmacy for the one antibiotic that might still work, scraping algae off the inside of an old water tank so it will filter a little longer. It is boiling, filtering, and reboiling water until the steam tastes acceptably like nothing. It is balancing the wattage between my receiver and the little array of solar cells I scrounged from a shopping mall's rooftop. It is pedaling a bike generator until my thighs burn just to top up the batteries and feed a 2-hour transmission. I carry my survival like a set of tools and rituals. A folding spade that doubles as a hammer, a tin of salvaged sewing needles, a handful of multivitamin pills from a clinic that had been looted months ago, and a stack of faded maps with towns circled and then crossed out. There is a cadence to my days now: scavenge, repair, broadcast, sleep, so thin and fragile that missing one step can break the whole sequence. What keeps me moving isn't the routine. It is the rumor that someone is still counting. It is the memory of a promise I made in a hospital hallway while the world fractured outside. If you wake, I'll keep the radio on. I'll find people. I swear to that empty room more times than I can count. The promise, like an ember, will not die. It is what I clutch when the canyon of grief opens under my feet. I have lost almost everything. My wife, Nora, is gone. There was a day when she could still laugh at my terrible coffee and the way I mispronounced the names of countries while reading the news. I can still hear that laugh if I press my ear to the pillow she used to use, a useless, aching exercise I allow myself sometimes. Our son, Jude, was 6 when the first supply lines broke. I remember carrying him on my shoulders through a crowd that smelled of smoke and fear. His small hand wrapped around my finger, as if the world could still be held together by grip alone. The last time I saw him, he was older than that older in the pictures stacked in my pack, and I tell myself that maybe somewhere he is still alive because that thought keeps me from unraveling. Loss is not neat. It is not a single monument you can visit and mourn at. It is a daily erosion, the slow forgetting of a joke, the failure to remember the exact shade of someone's eyes, the way a particular smell, Nora's shampoo mixed with burnt toast, arrives unbidden and knocks the breath out of you. Sometimes I replay small, private moments until they become a kind of prayer. Other times those moments are like rusted keys. No matter how much I turn them, the lock won't open. The world has a way of asking for repayment of kindness in this time. I have given shelter to people whose gratitude was a currency worth less than a warm bowl of stew. I have seen communities splinter under the strain of rationing and fear. I have had to do things in the name of survival that make my hands ache in the quiet, the kinds of choices that leave a taste of iron in the mouth. I have stolen fuel from silent convoys and bartered away a year's worth of canned peaches for a single bag of water purification tablets. Regret is thick in my chest like an old bruise, but there is also a stubbornness in me, a small defiance that refuses to accept erasure. I am driven by the thin, stubborn conviction that being the voice on the air matters. When static creeps across the frequency, when the generator clicks and dies and the light in the shack goes out, the silence feels like a personal betrayal. So I keep the signal alive. Not because I expect salvation to tune in with a cavalry of supplies, but because someone, somewhere, may hear a human voice that says, "You are not alone." People call in sometimes. The voices are ragged. A farmer who has a makeshift well and can spare a few liters if someone brings seeds. An old woman who knows how to mend a diesel pump. A teenager who can jury-rig circuits and wants to trade labor for lessons in radio operation. Each voice is a thread I can follow. Each contact is a small map toward a larger picture of what remains. Sometimes callers only need to talk. Often they simply need their name to be spoken into the air as proof they still exist. There are moral lines I try not to cross, but the world blurs them. I refuse to broadcast precise coordinates of stockpiles. The radio can save you, but it can also get you killed when the wrong ears are listening. I learned that the hard way when I shared a water source on the air, and the next day the place was stripped clean, and two people I had thought were friends were gone. Now I code messages in stories, a passing reference to the willow by the hollow instead of a map coordinate. People who know listen between the lines. Those who don't sift through static and take nothing. My body bears the history of this living. A scar runs along my forearm from a fuel stove that tipped over the winter the heaters failed. My hands are thickened and calloused from repairs, and from the endless turning of screws that hold the world together for a little while longer. My sleep is a fragile thing. Nightmares visit in which the sky is a falling ceiling, and the people I lost are behind glass, reaching and never able to break through. I am often exhausted, sometimes close to giving up, but when the transmitter hums and a voice answers back, I find a second wind. I keep small relics with me. A chipped radio dial from the studio where I used to work. A seamed photograph of Nora and Jude on a beach, the ocean in the background like a promise we once made to the future. I touch this photograph before I go on air. It steadies me. It reminds me that there is a point to speaking even when the words seem small against the scale of what we've lost. I also keep a ledger of names. It begins as a practical log, time, frequency, contact. But it has become a list of lit candles. I write every voice I hear, the date, a note of what they needed, a short impression. Years from now, if there are years, someone might find that book and know there were people here, that we did not vanish without a sound. It is a quiet, stubborn act of record-keeping that says, we existed. There is a hope inside me that is not naive. It is less like a bright bulb and more like a stubborn moss that grows in the cracks where water still lingers. It clings. It refuses to give up. Sometimes the hope is practical, trade networks reforming, seeds redistributed, small gardens taking root inside greenhouses scavenged from research facilities. Sometimes the hope is human, a child who learns to thread a needle, an old man who sings the old songs, two strangers sharing a ration and deciding to walk together. Those moments are tiny rebellions against the collapse. Most nights, when the setup hums and the voice of a distant caller fades into static, I sit with the antenna like a man holding a lifeline. I think of the promise in that hospital hallway. I think of breaking bread with strangers and of teaching someone the way to splice a wire. I think of Jude's small hand and try to imagine a future where children can again name colors without flinching. I am not a savior. I am clay baked hard by weather and loss. I am someone who refuses to let silence win. If that makes me stubborn, then stubborn is what I am. If it makes me foolish, so be it. I broadcast because voices are the last threads of the world I remember. And because, somewhere beyond the static, those threads can knot and weave into something that looks suspiciously like a future. So I keep repairing, rationing, scavenging, and talking. I keep the log and the photograph and the antenna tuned. I keep the promise, because promises are a kind of map. And where maps exist, maybe, just maybe, so does a way forward. They called it the dying years at first, a name someone on a forum typed between panic and prayer. Then the name stuck because names give shape to fear. You learn to measure time by disasters now. We mark the years by the scorch marks on buildings and by the number of winters that didn't bring snow. For me, the crisis stopped being an abstract headline and started being the thing that chewed through my day-to-day. The slow emptying of buckets, the generator that coughed when it should have purred, the way people's eyes got harder the longer they waited. The primary crisis is slow and sudden at once, an extended, planet-wide breakdown of water rhythms and weather patterns that used to carry life. It is drought that refuses to break, heat that climbs a little higher every year, and storms that are no longer predictable. Fields that once fed whole towns now look like mosaic maps of cracked mud. Rivers that were lifelines are skeletons of stone and salt. The sky, once seasonal and rational, has been replaced by an erratic beast, sometimes a blank sheet of heat-swell haze, sometimes a wall of angry, black storm with acid on its breath. Survival gets harder every day for reasons that multiply like rot. The immediate is physical. Water sources run low, pumps break, fuel for generators shrinks. The batteries that keep our radios alive run down faster in the heat. The systemic is political and social. Supply chains fractured. Governments shrank to survival cells or dissolved entirely. And with their disappearance went the small scaffolding of law and mediation that kept people from tearing one another apart. And then there are the ecological feedbacks. As soils dry, carbon-rich peat and permafrost burned and released greenhouse gases, which fed higher temperatures and more instability, which then fed more fires and die-off. We're stuck in the loops of our own making. I see the evidence every time I climb the mast and scan the horizon. Once, you could read a weather map and make an educated guess. Now the patterns are erratic. The jet stream that used to sweep weather east and west has knotted and stalled in places, letting heat sit over an area for weeks or months. Atmospheric rivers, those long, wet conduits of moisture, either vanish or unload everything in a single catastrophic burst that floods and poisons the land. In other places, the Hadley cell shifts have pushed the rain belts away from regions that have relied on them for centuries. The result is a geography rewritten. Deserts where farms used to be, salt flats where wetlands sang with frogs. It's not just theory. I learned to read those losses in people's faces. There's Mara across the ridge, once a school teacher, who turned a church basement into a community cistern site. She kept notes of rain events the way priests kept records. The notes stopped being a pattern and became a list of exceptions. June shower, 2018. October storm, 2020. After that, nothing reliable. When her cistern failed in the third season without reliable rain, her group scattered. Some traded away everything for a half bottle of bleach. Some joined a caravan and took off north. A few never came back. Encounters with others vary wildly. Some people are allies in the bluntest sense. You trade spare parts for seeds, teach someone to splice wire, and they teach you how to coax a dead pump back to life. The radio has connected me to a small web, names and short exchanges that form the scaffolding of cooperation. There is old Ben, who can still coax diesel engines into obedience with a hammer and patience. He shows up with parts and a stubborn grin. There is Layla, the teenager who can salvage solar panels and make them sing at half capacity. These people are reasons I leave the shack some mornings. But the other encounters are the ones that break you. Raider bands have learned to move with purpose. They are less opportunistic now and more organized, moving with intel that suggests someone was listening, even whispers told over the air. Whole groups have formed around the grind of taking. The harvesters, the scav hounds, the jackals, names born from fear. They move along transit routes and the dried riverbeds, looking for caches, for wells, for equipment with labels they recognize. I've seen communities stripped almost overnight because someone on the air was careless with coordinates. Trust has become the most dangerous commodity. Severe weather is now a direct threat to whatever we call a community. Dust storms come with the force of small hurricanes, driven by heat differentials that the old climate models didn't account for in their wayward assumptions. They carry fine particulate and chemical residues from burned urban sites and old industrial zones. You can lose hours of your life's worth of work, gardens buried, solar panels caked, makeshift shelters collapsed, under a single rolling wall of grit and flame-scorched sediment. Then there are the heat domes, stagnant pockets of air that bake everything for weeks. Crops that might have recovered after a short heatwave wither under those domes and never rebound. And sometimes the sky switches temperament altogether. We get corrosive rain now, chemical-laced downpours that strip paint and kill the last tender green. It's the waste of the old world returning to bite the new one. Toxic runoff from industrial sites, salt and chemical residues from the drowned coastal zones, the slow leaching of everything we buried and pretended would stay put. If you don't have the right filters, that rain is death in a bottle. My limitations are practical and precise, and I write them down because numbers help me plan. My cistern holds 350 liters if it's full. Right now it's at about 30%, about 105 liters, shared among 6 people who come through regularly. That means, on a good rationing calculus, about 5 liters per person per day if used strictly for drinking and minimal cooking. It's not enough for long. The solar array, cobbled together from 3 supermarket panels and a salvage rooftop strip, provides about 60-80 watt-hours in overcast conditions, more in bright sun. That runs the radio for a few hours and keeps a couple of LED lights on the main night watch. It does not run heaters, pumps, or the small refrigeration unit anymore. Fuel is measured in single liters saved like currency. I have roughly 12 liters left in cans that I guard like a relic. When that fuel goes, so does the backup generator and our ability to run the water pump during storms or nighttime. We face logistical bottlenecks every day. Filters need replacement. Chlorine tablets are rare. Pump diaphragms wear out and the parts no longer exist on store shelves. If a pump goes, it's not just the time to fix it. The well will silt up, pumps will seize, and a mechanical failure becomes a months-long problem. Crop seeds are another choke point. There is less genetic diversity in what people plant now because the big seed companies collapsed or hoarded stockpiles. That means disease or a new pest can wipe out entire harvests. Everything is more fragile because redundancy has been shaved away. I try to put some science in the air when I speak to listeners, not as a sermon but as a practical survival manual. Boil water when you can, yes, but when you can't, use a solar still. A plastic sheet over a shallow pit with a cup in the center to collect condensation. It's slow, but it works where there's sun and little else. Cloth strainers and charcoal layered with sand work as a primary filter. Then a drop of household bleach, roughly 4 drops per liter for clear water, more if murky. This is crude, risky guidance, but it's what we have to oxidize what you can't filter. When dealing with chemical rain, the only option is to collect runoff from roofs that are known clean, metal roofs that aren't corroded, and run the water through activated charcoal if possible. If in doubt, don't drink it. Move on. The choice to hydrate with suspect water is often a gamble between immediate death and delayed illness. Sometimes the gamble is necessary. There are agricultural tactics I share on air as well. Mulching, covering exposed soil with straw, plastic, or leaf litter, reduces evaporation. Plant in basins to catch and concentrate any rare rain. Raise beds and add compost to improve water retention. Use shade cloths and temporary hoop houses to mitigate heat spikes during critical growing periods. Rotate crops to keep soil microbiomes from collapsing. These are small acts, stopgaps rather than solutions, but they stretch the difference between starvation and survival. We're also limited by information. The old satellite networks collapsed into silence or became too expensive for anyone here to access reliably. That's why the radio matters. It is a distributed, low-energy mesh of human knowledge. When I get a report of a storm forming or a band of raiders moving along a certain route, I broadcast it widely to warn others. Sometimes the warning buys hours or days of preparation. Sometimes the warning is ignored and people get taken. The radio is a blunt instrument. It saves the careful and condemns the careless. It is also watched. You cannot be too explicit. I learned to code warnings, stories that signal meaning to those in the know and nothing to those who might misinterpret. The human cost is an exponential curve. As resources dwindle, the social fabric frays. Families turn on each other over lines of water. Communities wither as elders die without medicines that used to be routine. Even what we rescue now, someone's knowledge of how to repair a pump, an old technician who remembers how to splice thick power cable, becomes a kind of currency. People move in patterns seeking skills as much as food. Mechanics, medics, water keepers. Those people are protected. They are also hunted. And then there's the rumor, an ache of hope that is its own kind of danger. Stories circulate of a place, an underground facility with deep aquifers, a research station with a seawater purification unit still humming, a convoy with a cache of seeds. I've tuned into these stories more times than I can count. Every rumor brings people together and breaks them apart. People pack up and go, only to find nothing or worse. That's why I'm cautious on air. I feed hints into the static, tiny beacons for people who know how to read them. The rumor keeps people moving, and movement is both survival and exposure. The crisis has turned us into problem solvers who owe every day to small technical fixes and human ingenuity. We jury-rig salvage into functioning systems. We teach each other to spot pump failures before they happen, to jury-rig a valve, to splice a wire. We share what limited data we have, temperature logs scrawled on paper, a makeshift rain gauge nailed to a fence post. That data matters. It maps patterns, however small. We live in a tension between endurance and collapse. The weather keeps ratcheting harder, the resources keep shrinking, and the people keep arriving, sometimes as neighbors, sometimes as threats. I speak into the radio because that breath, that connection, can tip a decision. It can warn a village to chain their cistern covers down before a dust storm strips them. Or it can let a mechanic know there's a pump in a hospital that needs a diaphragm and a man who knows how to fit it. The air between us is both weapon and lifeline. I don't pretend we have the big answers. The planetary systems that failed were vast and tangled. The only thing we can do on the ground is to respond. Conserve, repair, move water where it can be stored, protect seeds, teach skills, and try to keep the narrative, our shared information, alive. In that sense, the crisis is a long emergency. It is a test of our ability to make small systems resilient and to hold human networks together when institutional ones are gone. That's the storm we face. Not a single event, but a grind of failures that compound until the last useful thing in your life, water, a skilled hand, a battery, a trusted neighbor, goes away. The work is to delay that moment, to build redundancies where we can, to be cautious on the air, to barter skills, and to refuse to stop speaking. Because if the crisis finishes its slow, grinding work and all that remains is silence, then nothing will get the chance to rebuild. If we keep talking, keep warning, keep teaching, we maintain the only thing that can stitch small communities back into something like civilization. Knowledge shared and lived. The ration calendar on my wall is a geometry of desperation. Notches for days, circles where a ration was skipped, a jagged line where a shipment trickled in and then stopped. Lately, the pencil tip has worn down to a stub because there are fewer small victories to mark. When the cistern dips below a certain line, I feel it like an ache in my teeth. When the fuel gauge shows less than 6 liters in the can, my hands go cold even if the sun is pounding the corrugated roof. We're running out of everything that keeps a life going. It's not a sudden cliff but an erosion. Water first, then fuel, then the luxury of choices. Food follows the same path. There are days we eat half as much as we should and call it survival training. There are days when a tin of peaches is a festival. The solar array performs like a sick animal. Good hours, bad hours, and too often the bad. The generator coughs and wants to die on the worst days. Batteries that used to hold charge for weeks now fall flat overnight because heat drains their chemistry. The spare parts shelf, a curated museum of salvaged things, has more empty spaces than occupied ones. The pressure isn't only technical, it's social. People come with faces carved by hunger and ask for help, and sometimes they are asking because they truly have nothing left, and sometimes they are asking because they have learned it's easier to ask from someone with a radio. You can tell the difference by the way they look you in the eye. Genuine need asks while avoiding the gaze. Opportunism stares right at you and measures you. Raiders have adapted too. They learned how to use the riverbeds as roads, how to camouflage in the burned scrub, how to listen to the radio for weak signals that point to habit and routine. They move in small, efficient teams. No theatrics, no parades. They take quietly and leave quickly because noise invites more trouble. We had a group call themselves the Harrowers. They were efficient and mean. The jackals are less subtle. The harvesters are the worst at pretending morality. They raid with justification. We're taking what's necessary. And they leave more broken than harvested. The first raid I saw up close happened one afternoon when the sky was an iron bowl, pressurized and ready to blow. I was on the rooftop, hair plastered to my skull with sweat, retentioning a guy line on the antenna. I heard a vehicle down in the dry wash, first a cough, then a grinding, then the steady tick of something moving heavy. I dropped the wrench and listened until I could hear the voices, 3 men, low and exact, like wolves communicating. They were close. I had a choice. Go down and confront them, leave, or try to hide what I could and hope they were passing. Confrontation is theater. I had no armor, no backup, and the idea of standing with a crowbar against 3 men with rifles is the kind of romantic thought that gets you killed. I stuffed the most important things, the hard copies of my ledger, the photograph of Nora and Jude, the small sealed tin of antibiotics, into the pack and slipped into the cellar. I braced the door and watched as shadows crossed the windows. They took what they could find in the main room, food tins, a few batteries, a smoking can of coffee, and then they went to the room where the generator was. Nearby houses were stripped. Scraps of curtain fluttered in the wind like white flags. I could hear one of them curse when the generator's crank handle was missing. Someone had taken it long ago. They were methodical, efficient. They kicked the cistern cover and then left, having taken what was usable and left the rest as a warning. After they left, I unclenched like I had been holding my breath for an hour. My packs were lighter but intact. My heart was heavier. It was a narrow victory, a reminder that survival is often the art of not getting noticed. That same week, a voice came through on the band. It was garbled at first, broken, like a tune played through a battered speaker. But something in the cadence made me stop soldering and listen. The signal came and went, a ghostly handshake, but it said a place name I hadn't heard in years. Bluewell. There was a place on the map from the old world, an irrigation basin and a natural spring tucked deep beneath layers of shale. It had been a small community that faded in the early migrations. People used to tell stories about Bluewell like it was a myth, a place where water still ran cold and the wells were deep and clean. I had filed the name away as folklore, a place for children's maps. This broadcast was different. It had specifics embedded in casual talk. A description of a rusted iron gate with a chipped star, references to a windmill tower still standing at the third bend, and a half-phrase about a sealed pump room that only the right code can open. Whoever owned that voice also mentioned a schedule, convoys leaving at oddly spaced intervals, a code phrase. The willow finally fell, and then the line died into static. Rumor is a hard thing to share on air. A false hope can be worse than none. People will burn their last ration chasing a mirage if you hand them the compass. So I encoded the hint when I repeated it. I told the story as if it were a memory, an old song with notes missing, laced with disclaimers in the way the old broadcasters used to say, for entertainment only. A few of my regulars understood. Old Ben came by that night and tapped his fingers on the table. Layla's eyes lit up. Others heard and packed without asking, because hope is an engine with a greedy appetite. Suddenly, there was movement on the roads that hadn't been used in months. A caravan left the North Ridge with 2 carts and a dozen people, faces set like something decided. They stopped at my place because they had heard me. The radio is a magnet in its own way, and we traded what little I had. A handful of fuel and a lesson on how to splice a certain kind of cable, in exchange for news about a route and the rumor's corroboration. Yes, the gate with the chipped star, yes, the windmill, but also a warning about a band of harrowers working the eastern approach. This is when trust becomes a calculus. I had to decide. Should I put the Bluewell rumor into the clear air explicitly? If I did, I risked drawing attention, raiders, opportunists, or worse, to a place that might be a lifeline. If I didn't, I risked becoming a hoarder of hope, someone who fenced the last useful map bits to hide behind my shack. The radio's ethics are sharp. You can save many by revealing something, and you can doom many by revealing it. Sometimes revealing is as dangerous as keeping. I spoke in knotty sentences, in old broadcast tricks. There's an old song the children used to hum about a spring that keeps singing when the world stones over. If the song is true, then the willow fell last spring. People in the know heard and made decisions. People who weren't in the know heard and hoped. And in the spaces between those 2 groups the world rearranged. Trust also breaks in softer ways. Layla came to stay for a while. She wanted to learn the radio the way some people wanted to learn to plant seeds. She had a steady hand and quick eyes. She had also had a brother who had been taken by raiders. The way she watched the horizon, always scanning, was like a grief with a purpose. She wanted to be useful. She asked me once very quietly if I had family. When I said Nora and Jude, she didn't pry. She listened as if my words were a liturgy. Sometimes the tension is internal in ways that are harder to explain. There are mornings when I wake up and the grief is raw and immediate, and the idea of getting out of bed seems like too much of a task. There are times when a memory will hit me, like the smell of wheat bread baking in an oven, and the world compresses into a single, unbearable ache. Those are the times I have to rely on routines to function. Check the batteries, inventory rations, sweep the dust out of the generator housing, tune the antenna. Routine is an antiseptic against despair. We tried to expand our network of allies. I taught a group in the West how to use a wind-powered compressor to aerate a small fish tank they were using as an experiment. It was crude but worked. A handful of fish grew and reproduced where there had been none. Those micro-victories were everything, proof that life could be coaxed back in pockets. But every success sends out a beacon. News traveled along channels like a contagion. They have fish. They have a compressor. And within weeks the group reported a pair of raids where the raiders took everything and left the tanks empty, the pumps smashed. When the pressure climbs, people make desperate choices. I had a man show up one dusk with a baby at his hip and his eyes like someone who'd made a bargain he couldn't unmake. He asked for water, and instead of begging politely, he offered to take me to a place with a hidden cache, contraband medical supplies. He said the cache was real and ready, but he wanted my help, my voice on the air, my credibility, to confirm there were no predators. I had to tell him no. Using the radio to verify a cache is a crime in the new code we try to practice. It's an invitation for others to descend like vultures. I told him the truth. I don't broadcast coordinates. He left angry and frightened. That night I heard 3 vehicle engines in the distance. They came down the old highway and cut through the flats. The baby's father was not the only one who had gotten a last-second plan together. My shack was a waypoint on more than one map now. We prepared. We covered the cistern. We took the antenna down so there would be no tall thing to spot, and we braced the doors. Layla and old Ben sharpened implements and laid them where they could be reached. I wrote a short script, code phrasing if we had to send a signal to the caravan, to say the will refused the rain if we had to warn them of a trap. Language becomes a weapon of survival, simple words rearranged. The convoy came. They were not raiders at first glance, more organized than that, with a banner fashioned from a sweater and a symbol that meant something I couldn't parse. They asked for water. I listened to the leader's tone, to the way he avoided my eyes, to the way his people watched the building for an hour longer than necessary. I offered as much as we could spare, 3 liters each for a dozen, and they thanked me with a civility that tasted like iron. Later that night, as they slept by the wash, I heard them argue in low voices. I thought of the father with the baby, and wondered if he had been part of the loose net that had heard the rumor and left too soon. Every day is a negotiation now, and those negotiations shape people. Some become cruel. Some become gently fierce. Some become both at different times. Trust is measured in the length of a handshake and in the frequency with which someone returns your tools. Borrowed and not returned is a new kind of theft. The mystery of Bluewell sits like a stone in the gut. It is a place that might be clean water and community, or it might be a trap, or it might be gone entirely. The rumor has changed me, the way rumors change people who have too few options left. I find myself listening for that voice at odd hours, tuning the band until the night is thin with static, and the station hums like a haunted thing. I replay the words in my head until they smell of meaning. There is also a deeper question I ask when I can be honest with myself. If Bluewell exists and it is a sanctuary, will I go? Or will I stay and keep this fragile outpost of communication alive? Each has its pull. The radio is not just a tool. It is my duty, my identity. Leaving it would be like deserting a post. Going might mean saving my skin, maybe a life, but leaving the frequency dark could silence 100 others who listen because they have nothing else. And then there is the most human of all fears. What if Bluewell is true and I get there and Jude is there? Or not? What if the rumor is a cruel echo and I have traded my station for nothing? What if I go and bring people to a place that cannot hold them? The tension pulls at everything I do. I teach Layla to patch Coke's cable and her hands shake because she's tired and hungry. I barter seeds for a can of diesel. I patch the cistern. I mend fences. I listen to the frequency and watch the road. I count the days until the next expected convoy. I keep dreaming in the background, small, irrational images of a windmill turning, of children drawing water from a clean pump. All this pressure, raiders, dwindling supplies, rumors, moral decisions, compounds into a steady drumbeat against the ribs. The rising action isn't just external. It's an internal pressure cooker that forces choices. Broadcast the rumor and risk drawing everything to one place, or keep silent and let people wander into worse fates. Help the caravan by sharing a portion of our water and risk depletion, or hold it close and watch humanity pass by parched. When the jackals came for the cistern at dawn, the choice wasn't theoretical. They rolled into the wash with a confidence that was frightening because it was practice. They had a route, they had tools, they had a plan to cut the lines and siphon. We surprised them. We were a small, ragged wall of people who had decided to fight. Layla's bolt through the solar mount sent a shout. Ben's improvised shotgun did more to dissuade than to kill. The jackals took a few of their own and left. We lost a few cans, but the cistern was intact. It was a narrow victory, not noble, not glorious, but enough to keep breathing. Still, the raid made the stakes real in a way rumors never could. Bluewell is no longer just a hope. It is pressure and choice and a possible solution to a thinned ledger. The next move is unclear. The world pushes, and we push back in small, precarious ways. The tension rises, and every decision feels like dropping a stone in a dark well. What comes back is uncertain, and the sound of it could be the last comfort we have. The morning started like any other in the long stretch of dust and sun, but the air carried a tension that made my skin crawl. Even before the first hint of heat hit the corrugated roof, I knew something had shifted. The frequency on the radio crackled with static and fragments of a voice that wasn't familiar but carried urgency. The words were broken, but I caught blue well, water, Eastridge, hurry, storm. My pulse spiked, a drumbeat in my ears. The storm, that could only mean one thing. It was coming fast and furious, faster than the patterns I had been tracking. This was not a slow-moving dust dome or a predictable heat wave. It was a beast with teeth. I packed what I could carry. The half-full water bottles, the tin of antibiotics, the few cans of preserved food, the solar battery I could manage to carry on my back. Layla came running down the stairs, a shadow of excitement and fear. Her backpack was lighter than mine but equally precious. "Are you really going?" she asked, eyes wide. The tremor in her voice wasn't fear of the journey alone. It was fear of leaving the station behind, of leaving the frequency silent, of stepping into a place that might not exist. I nodded. There was no room for debate. Rumor or not, this was a chance and we couldn't waste it. The road to Bluewell was brutal. The sky had darkened unnaturally fast, a thick, pressurized sheet of gray hanging low over the plains. Dust whipped around us in sheets, clawing at our faces, scraping across the metal of abandoned vehicles and the cracked asphalt. We moved cautiously, keeping to the low washes, using the terrain to hide our approach. Every scrape of metal, every rattling shutter, made my heart leap. The thought of raiders or scavengers catching us in the open was a constant shadow. Hours stretched into a day. We crossed dried riverbeds and rusted bridges that threatened to collapse with the smallest weight. I checked the compass over and over, watched the map scrawled on the inside flap of my pack, whispered coordinates to Layla to make sure we didn't stray. The rumor of Bluewell had become a compass of hope, but hope carries weight, and weight becomes danger when the world is cracked and raw. Late afternoon, the storm finally made itself known. A wall of swirling gray-black dust moved faster than I could have imagined, approaching from the south. The wind tore at our clothes and skin, stripped loose rocks from the ground, and carried a sharp, metallic tang that made my eyes water. We ducked behind the remnants of an old warehouse, the corrugated metal screaming in protest. The storm was a living thing. It growled through the plains, rattled abandoned signs, and shook the ground in a way that made each step feel dangerous. This was the moment that demanded a choice. Stay put and risk being buried in dust and debris, or push forward into unknown territory to reach Bluewell before the storm cut off all access. I looked at Layla. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes were resolute. I knew what we had to do. The storm could wait for no one, but neither could opportunity. We moved. Every step was calculated, every drop of energy rationed. The dust clawed at our lungs, and my throat burned from grit. My boots ground against the dry earth with a rhythm that matched the thumping of my heart. Hours later, as the horizon blurred with dust and heat shimmer, we saw it. The chipped iron gate, half buried under sand, exactly as the voice had described. My knees shook in disbelief and relief. The windmill tower stood, a skeletal sentinel against the storm-dark sky. Bluewell wasn't a myth, it was real. The gate was locked with a rusted mechanism that seemed impossible to open, but Layla, nimble-fingered and sharp-eyed, spotted a small hatch beneath the main lock. We pushed, pried, and finally, with a creak that echoed like a gunshot, the gate opened. Beyond it lay a narrow path flanked by shrubs that had survived the drought, and then the first glimmer of water, shimmering like a secret. I stepped forward, cautious, heart hammering. The first well we reached was still functioning, deep and clear, the water tasting of stone and rain and life itself. Layla crouched beside me, scooping water into her hands, drinking like a desert bloom finally quenched. But the relief was fleeting. Behind the gate, the place was not empty. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man, tall, lean, eyes wary but not hostile. "You shouldn't have come during the storm," he said. His voice was calm, measured, but there was an edge beneath it that said he had seen too much. I raised my hand slowly. "We mean no harm. We were following a signal rumor," I admitted. The man studied us. Then slowly he gestured. "You can stay, but only if you prove you can survive here, if you can contribute." It was not a welcome, it was a test. And in that moment, I realized that survival wasn't about finding water alone. It was about earning a place, about proving that hope could coexist with the discipline to maintain it. The storm reached its apex as we settled near the first working well. Dust whipped over the fences, rattling the windmill blades, turning the water surface to a swirl of grit and reflection. The man, whose name was finally revealed as Corin, taught us quickly how to filter water from the wind-driven sediment, how to repair the windmill with minimal tools, how to ration the remaining seeds to plant a resilient patch of crops in the lee of the ridge. Every instruction was precise, a survival manual distilled from years of necessity. That night, the storm howled outside like a beast testing the walls of our sanctuary. I sat by the small generator, listening to the static, and reflected. I had risked everything, water, safety, the last of our reserves, to find a place that might sustain life. I had chosen trust over isolation, and it had brought us here. Yet I could not escape the memory of the raiders, the jackals and harrowers who might follow, drawn by the same rumors that had guided us. Hope, I realized, is never free. It demands vigilance, courage, and the willingness to make choices that could kill or save you. The storm passed at dawn, leaving the air sharp and clear. The first light caught the windmill blades, turning them into silver slivers against the sky. Water pooled in troughs, the dust settled on the roof, sparkling like ashes. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt the fragile pulse of life return. Layla smiled, exhausted but alive, and for a moment the fear of the storm and the perilous journey fell away. But the world outside Bluewell remained broken. The road back to the plains was still treacherous, raiders still prowled, resources were still scarce, and the storm was only one of many to come. This sanctuary was not an end. It was a foothold, a chance to begin again, to apply all the lessons learned in hardship. In that moment, I understood the turning point wasn't simply reaching the water. It was recognizing the cost and the responsibility of having found it. Survival was no longer just about holding onto life. It was about what you did with the life you had managed to preserve. I turned to Layla. "We made it," I said softly, "but this is just the beginning. We've survived to learn, to help, to endure. And we have to remember that every day is a choice." She nodded, understanding without words. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope cautiously, deliberately, knowing that the storm would come again, and that one day, maybe, humanity would learn to live with the fragility of hope and the endurance of the human spirit. The turning point had arrived, not in the discovery alone, but in the reckoning, that to survive we must risk, must trust, and must commit to actions bigger than ourselves. Bluewell was real. The storm had tested us, and I knew, with a clarity sharpened by dust and fear and relentless days, that we would face whatever came next together, armed with knowledge, courage, and a fragile but unyielding spark of hope. The storm left Bluewell looking like a place that had been tested and not broken. The dust settled into the furrows and the windmill leaned easier on its bearings, as if relieved to be turning again. Water pooled in places I'd never imagined would hold it, shadowed hollows, rust-rimmed troughs, the low basin by the broken gate. The first morning after, the world smelled faintly of wet earth, and that scent hit me like a confession. Something alive had been preserved. We did what people who have seen too much learn to do: count losses first, then inventory surviving assets. Layla and I walked the perimeter with Corin and two others from the core group. They'd lost a woman in the caravan that arrived shortly after we did. She'd been sick, and the road took more than she could spare. There were others who didn't make it back across the ridge, people who'd gone on rumors and found only dust. I counted them in a ledger in my head. Names, fragments really, and felt that old bruise of guilt I'd carried for years. The father with the baby, the one who'd offered me contraband in exchange for my voice, was among those who vanished. I'd refused him. I'd told him to not use the air to verify caches. It was the safe call then, but it stayed with me like a weight. Had my caution been an act that cost a life? I have no clean answers, only consequences. Bluewell's water was better than anything I'd drunk in years. It tasted of stone and cold and the thin memory of rain. The windmill's pump drew deep, and the aquifer beneath, for whatever reason, had not been entirely emptied by the years of drought. Corin said it's fed by fissures that are stubborn, old geology that resists the surface's tantrums. It felt like being given a second heart. Still, he was blunt. The aquifer is not infinite. We would have to steward it, ration it, and build redundancy quickly, or what we had would become tragedy. Community in Bluewell formed fast and uneven. Those who had skills, Corin with plumbing and drilled shafts, a woman who knew seed germination, a man who could mend metal like it was paper, became invaluable. We set up shifts to keep the pump running, rotating guardians at the gate, sharing chores that used to feel like chores and now felt like rights. There was an awkward, fragile dignity in watching people relearn how to be useful to one another. A carpenter taught a teenager how to splice wood so a raised bed would not collapse. An old nurse pooled the last of her antibiotics and held a clinic that smelled of iodine in careful hands. For me, the question was always the radio. Would I take the station down and let the world go silent from this ridge in exchange for a secure life in Bluewell? If I stayed and kept broadcasting, I might draw attention, good and bad. If I left, someone else might pick up the frequency with less care and more noise, or the band would fall to silence, and with it the fragile thread of shared knowledge. I had come to Bluewell with the ledger and the photograph and the promise. The promise weighed heavier than the ease of safety, so I made a choice that felt like both betrayal and duty. I stayed long enough to help secure the place, taught a few people to repair the windmill, helped set up filtration for the communal cistern, taught Corin's apprentice the basics of radio maintenance. And then I rigged a small, low-consumption transmitter on a battery bank cobbled from the parts we had. It was less powerful than my shack rig, but it was a beacon. I left Layla in Bluewell as a relay operator. She could run the local net, pass messages, and warn us if something came close. Corin agreed we would not broadcast coordinates, only codes. We erected a guard detail and established a rule. Newcomers must pass a small test of skill and patience before being granted water shares. It was all a crude attempt at ethics and practicality stitched together. The immediate aftermath showed the best and worst of humanity in rapid cycles. A band from the plains came by, thin, hungry, their children's eyes too old for their faces. We rationed carefully and let them stay, under supervision, because turning away a whole family felt like something the world could not survive on. They were grateful in a way that cleaned something inside my chest, but the gratitude could sour into entitlement. A week later, a different group, men with a practiced look to their faces, slipped into the shadows near the gate and tried to siphon the pump lines at night. We caught them because someone heard a whisper and someone else checked. It ended with beatings and rancor, and the slow, weary decisions one must make about who to keep and who to send back into the dust. Mercy costs us resources. Cruelty costs us sleep. We fumbled a balance. Nature here showed small surprises. The windmill's wake sent a cool eddy and a flock of sparrows, malnourished and ragged, came to drink. Tiny amphibians appeared in a pool shaded by a leaning wall, frogs so small they could fit in the hollow of my palm. We patched a broken irrigation run, and a patch of barley quietly took hold in the lee of the hill. Nothing grand, nothing that would suggest the planet had healed, but small pockets of life were returning where the conditions allowed it. Those pockets felt like epilogues written in pencil, not ink, easy to smudge but visible. Inside me, things shifted. I was less certain that isolation was virtue. Years of holding on to a single map, a single station, a single promise had made me wary of the world. Bluewell taught me that survival is not a solitary trophy, but a shared labor. My ledger, once a private list of voices, became public in a new way. I started recording not just contacts but lessons. How to splice a pump shaft from a broken pipe, a recipe for a stew that made 3 sparse potatoes carry a family, a shorthand for how to identify corrosive rain by its smell. I taught others to broadcast with discipline, to tell stories that signaled meaning to those who needed it and nothing to the predators. But the memories did not leave. Night still comes, and with it dreams that fold into grief. I remember Nora's laugh, the curl of Jude's hair, the way their hands fit into mine. There are moments when those images swell until the present blurs. I also remember the people we lost because of decisions made in the name of caution or hope. The ledger keeps their names. I say them aloud sometimes, as if saying them can stitch something small shut. We did not bask in the victory of finding Bluewell. The larger world beyond the ridge remained a map of hazards. Raiders adapted. Rumors mutated. Word of Bluewell slipped into the channels it shouldn't have. Someone's exuberant child, someone's careless boast, and we had to prepare. We learned that secrecy is as much work as defense. It requires constant vigilance, rotating patrols, watch posts, and a network of lookouts who would warn us days before a known band would arrive. Sometimes the network failed and we lost supplies. Other times it worked and a threat moved on. I also had to reconcile with an uncomfortable truth. Bluewell's existence meant choices for people I didn't know. When I broadcast a coded warning about a harrower patrol on the eastern approach, it saved an outpost but also sent men and women walking toward a different danger. An ambush on a road we thought clear. Choices ripple. The ethics of radio are messy, and I could not claim a clean conscience. All I could do was try harder, to encode more precisely, to listen better, to verify before amplifying. As weeks turned to months, Bluewell settled into a rhythm. The windmill supplied water. A small greenhouse began to shade seedlings. The radio line, low-powered, cadence-coded, kept a thin string between pockets of humanity. Layla became a competent operator, her voice steady on the air, and I found myself less tethered to the role of lone keeper and more to the role of teacher and messenger. It suited me. I could patch antennas in the morning and sit with a pot of watered-down coffee in the evening and listen to a chorus of voices that were not quite family but not strangers either. The future, as it always had been, remained uncertain. The climate did not relent. Dust storms still came. Corrosive rain still fell elsewhere. The aquifer could not be taken for granted. But there was a subtle shift in how I felt about what we were doing. Hope, once a thing I hoarded like fuel, had become a shared currency. We could spend it together and make it stretch. I carry my ledger with me still. New names are added. A girl who can graft rootstock. An old man who remembers how to read weather by cloud shadows. A woman who once taught in a school and now runs a tutoring circle for the children who survive. Each name is a small investment. Each lesson recorded is an attempt to create redundancy and memory. In the quiet hours, I sometimes hook up a weak transmitter and speak into the night. I tell stories of the windmill and the chipped gate, but I do it in code. I send out small lanterns of information. How to purify water in a pinch, where to find certain salvaged parts, how to coax seed packets into sprouting. I also read names aloud, the ones in the ledger, as a way of affirming presence. It's a strange liturgy, practical, mournful, full of stubborn grace. On the ridge one evening, watching the sunlight cut across the troughs, Layla sat beside me and pointed to a small frog that had hopped from one puddle to another. "It's only a speck," she said, "but it's still moving." I smiled, thinking of how often we are reduced to specks in a story that feels too large. Being part of a community that moves those specks toward life, that's what Bluewell gave me. Not the illusion of restoration, but the means to keep trying. There is no grand resolution. There is no cinematic finale. The aftermath is a series of careful days stitched together with human hands. We guard what we have, teach what we know, and keep the radio light on because voices matter. If the world mends, it will do so slowly and patchwise. If it doesn't, at least we will have made our small pockets of life matter a little longer. I do not know where Jude is. I do not know if Nora's laugh ever crossed another valley. What I do know is this. I promised a hospital room that I would keep the radio on, and I have kept that promise. And in keeping it, I have found a new promise, to share what we have, to teach what we learn, and to name those who pass through our days so they do not evaporate into the dust without trace. When night falls in Bluewell now, the windmill hums, the pump clicks, and the radio breathes a soft, coded murmur into the dark. It is not enough to save the world. It is enough to remind us that we tried. That, for all the losses, is something to hold. The nights in Bluewell have a strange quality now. After months of storms, dust, and scarcity, there is a stillness I cannot fully trust. The windmill hums gently, the water runs clear from the deep well, and the seedlings I helped plant sway under the tentative sunlight. Life persists here, fragile and uneven, yet insistently alive. It is easy in moments like these to imagine the world outside the ridge is equally calm. But I know better. Beyond these hills, dust storms rage, scorched plains stretch for miles, and raiders still hunt the desperate. Hope is never permanent, and survival is never guaranteed. I have learned to measure my days not by the absence of danger, but by the presence of small victories. A frog that leaps from one puddle to another. A child who laughs because someone told a story. Water collected without loss or contamination. Every preserved seed, every repaired pipe, every day the radio remains on. That is our quiet triumph. The world has not healed. The scars of climate collapse are deep and relentless, and I cannot pretend otherwise. But life, stubborn and unpredictable, persists in pockets like Bluewell. And in those pockets we carve out our existence. I reflect often on the choices that brought me here. The decision to follow the rumor of the well, to risk exposure to raiders, to trust strangers in a world that had taught me distrust, was not simple. Every step forward felt like balancing on a knife's edge. One miscalculation, one misjudged character, and everything could have ended. Not just my life, but the fragile chance for a community to survive. Now, standing on the ridge at dawn, I understand that survival is never about certainty. It is about courage, perseverance, and the willingness to make imperfect decisions under impossible circumstances. Layla has grown into her role with a quiet strength that surprises me every day. She manages the relay, coordinates resources, and keeps a watchful eye on the newcomers. Her presence is a reminder that even in desolation, people adapt. They learn. They endure. I sometimes see her sitting near the cistern at dusk, listening to the hum of the water, sketching a map, or writing messages to anyone who might be listening on the other end of the radio. Her hands carry the same calluses as mine, yet her spirit is undimmed. We have learned the hard truth. Hope is a delicate thing. It must be nurtured carefully, rationed, and defended. But it is also contagious. When a group of weary travelers stumbled into our perimeter, their eyes wide with exhaustion and fear, we offered water, shelter, and a moment of safety. In return, they shared knowledge of the plains, of a small cluster of survivors who had repurposed an old factory into a shelter. Even amid desperation, humans seek connection, seek cooperation. That thread is thin, yes, and it frays easily, but it exists. I think about the radio constantly. It is not a simple tool. It is a lifeline, a bridge, and sometimes a beacon of warning. Every coded transmission carries the weight of lives we cannot see, stories we may never hear, and decisions that could ripple far beyond our ridge. There is power in that connection, but also responsibility. One careless word could draw the wrong attention. One misjudged signal could cost lives. I carry that burden willingly, because to do nothing is to let the world fall silent. And silence is death. Yet there are moments when despair threatens to take hold. I remember the riverbeds cracked and hollow, the cities, reduced to rusting skeletons of commerce, the families lost to dust storms, starvation, and fire. Those memories linger like shadows, and some nights I lie awake imagining the world as it once was, or the world as it could have been. The weight of loss is relentless, but so too is the weight of survival. Each day we rise and perform the mundane, the necessary, the human tasks, fetching water, repairing walls, tending seedlings, and in those actions we find meaning. Bluewell is not paradise. It is a foothold, a fragile glimmer amid ruin. The soil is thin, the aquifer finite, and the winds of the plains still carry dust that can choke lungs and corrode metal. Yet we endure. We learn to anticipate, to ration, to anticipate the storms before they arrive. We learn to read the signs of the earth and sky, to adapt. Survival is no longer about holding onto a past world. It is about building a fragile present that can withstand the chaos around us. I find solace in the small rituals we create. Each morning I check the pumps, record water levels, and update the maps. Each evening, Layla and I broadcast coded updates, sharing survival tactics and observations, keeping the signal alive for whoever might be listening. These routines are simple, but they anchor us. They are reminders that we matter, that our actions ripple outward, and that life, fragile as it is, continues. I have come to understand that hope is not a guarantee. It is a decision. It is the choice to rise each day, to tend to the wells and the seedlings, to repair what is broken, and to reach out when others are in need. It is the courage to continue despite uncertainty, the resilience to endure loss without surrendering to despair. In this world, hope is not passive. It is active, and it must be defended as fiercely as life itself. The storm that brought us to Bluewell was a turning point, but it was also a reminder that survival is never permanent. The plains beyond our ridge remain a dangerous expanse. The aquifer will not last forever, and the world beyond our small community is still broken and unpredictable. We cannot assume security. We cannot assume safety. What we can do is keep moving forward, keep learning, keep connecting, and keep the spark of life alive in the face of everything that seeks to extinguish it. I do not know what tomorrow holds. I do not know if Bluewell will continue to exist in 6 months, or a year, or a decade. I do not know if the aquifer will dry, if the storms will return, or if the raiders will find us. But I do know this. Today, we have water. Today, we have a community. Today, the radio hums with coded voices, each one a testament to survival. And for today, that is enough. So I send this message to anyone who might be listening. Survive, yes, but do not merely survive. Connect, teach, protect, remember, build. Hope, even fragile and fleeting, is worth everything. Do not let the world's ruin convince you that life is meaningless. It is not. It is ours to shape, even in small, deliberate ways. Stay alive. Stay human, keep the signal on, keep the water flowing, keep planting seeds and watch them grow. The world may be broken, but we are still here. And as long as we draw breath, as long as we take steps forward, there is a chance, no matter how small, that life and hope will endure. Even in despair, even in loss, the choice remains. To let the light die or to feed it, however modestly, in the darkness. We choose light. We choose life. And in choosing, we remember that hope is not a destination. It is an act. And so we act every day for as long as we can.